The beast in chains. The storm over Delta 9 base howled like some dying animal. Rain drummed on the corrugated alloy roofs, the wind carrying the stench of scorched soil from the battlefield beyond the perimeter walls. Captain Rhys Calder leaned against a support beam outside the command tent, lighting a cigarette with hands still trembling from adrenaline. Hours ago, they had clawed their way out of a massacre. The escort arrived at dusk, 3 armored alien officers from the client faction they had reluctantly allied with. Between them lumbered a figure in shackles, her neck bowed under the weight of a collar etched with runes. Heavy chains ran from her wrists to her ankles, forcing her into short, shuffling steps. "This," the lead officer said in a sibilant accent, "is your reward, human. A hunter of the Vorthak clans. She tore through our troops until we bled her near death. Perhaps she will amuse you." Rhys took a long drag and studied their so-called gift. The creature stood taller than any man in camp, her frame wrapped in sinew and plates of natural armor. Her head was half-muzzled, yet her golden eyes burned with a sharp, dangerous intelligence. Jagged scars crossed her forearms and shoulders. Every movement was restrained by the bindings, but the tension in her muscles spoke of coiled violence. "Why give me something you're too afraid to keep?" Rhys asked dryly. The aliens laughed, a brittle, mocking sound, and shoved her forward. She stumbled, caught herself, and then fixed Rhys with a gaze that chilled him more than any battlefield corpse. There was no madness in those eyes, only fury and calculation. When the officers departed, Rhys ordered 2 guards to secure her in a reinforced cell adjacent to his quarters. He watched as she crouched in the corner, chains rattling softly, her breath a low growl. The men muttered that it was a trap, that the beast would break free and butcher them all. Rhys didn't answer. He'd seen enough cages to know what lived behind those eyes. Hours passed. The camp settled into uneasy silence, broken only by the hiss of the rain. Rhys sat on the edge of his cot, polishing his sidearm, replaying every detail of the day's fight. He'd seen the way the aliens flinched when they handed her over. She was more than a trophy. She was a problem they wanted to become his. A distant alarm wailed, then another. Shouts erupted outside. Rhys grabbed his rifle and bolted from his tent, boots splashing through puddles. Raiders. How they had slipped past the perimeter he didn't know, but plasma bolts already streaked through the night, striking fuel canisters and tents alike. South Sector breach. A soldier yelled before being cut down by a beam of green light. Rhys ducked behind a barricade, returning fire. He saw shapes darting between shadows, thin, insectoid marauders, blades flashing in their hands. The camp dissolved into chaos. Then he heard it, a deep, guttural roar from behind him. He turned. The chained beast was straining against the bars of her cell, eyes locked on the attackers swarming the camp. Her claws raked at the door, sparks flying. Rhys hesitated only a moment. The locks were mag-sealed, but he had the override code. He sprinted to the panel, smashed in the sequence. The cell door hissed open. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, soldier and beast. Then she lunged not at him, but past him, into the fray. Her claws tore through the first raider with a sound like ripping canvas. Plasma bolts hissed against her natural armor and scattered harmlessly. She moved with terrifying grace, a storm of teeth and talons, driving the marauders back. Rhys fought at her side, rifle barking in controlled bursts. A blade arced toward him, then vanished as she intercepted the attacker, crushing it beneath her weight. He found himself shouting orders, and though she didn't understand words, she followed every gesture, every pointed hand. Within minutes, the raiders were broken, fleeing into the darkness. The camp burned, but it still stood. The soldiers stared in awe at the towering figure now crouched beside Rhys, her breath heaving, claws dripping alien ichor. She turned her gaze toward him again. Not a beast glare this time, but something else, a warrior's recognition. Rhys lowered his rifle, rain streaking down his face. "Maybe," he murmured to himself, "you're not a curse after all." And for the first time, she did not growl, learning the language of claws. Morning light crept through the ruined camp, casting long shadows over charred barricades and smoldering wreckage. Captain Rhys Calder stood at the edge of the training yard, arms folded, watching the creature who had saved his life the night before. She was no longer confined to the reinforced cell. Instead, 2 lengths of chain still bound her wrists together, loose enough to allow movement, but a reminder to the rest of the camp that she was still dangerous. The soldiers kept their distance, whispering among themselves. Some called her a monster. Others, in hushed tones, called her a guardian. Rhys walked out into the yard, boots crunching on gravel. "On your feet," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand English. He pointed to the ground in front of him, then mimed a stance, knees bent, rifle raised. The creature cocked her head, golden eyes narrowing. Then, with surprising fluidity, she mirrored his posture, claws held up like curved knives, legs ready to spring. "Good," he muttered. What followed was a strange dance of gestures and instinct. Rhys took a step to the left, motioned with 2 fingers. She responded with a low growl, moving as he indicated. He lunged forward, feigning an attack. She countered with a sweeping strike that left a deep furrow in the training dummy's armor plating. The soldiers watching from the sidelines exchanged glances. "You're really doing this?" Lieutenant Marin called out, incredulous. Rhys didn't look back. "She fights better than half the recruits here. If she's going to stay, she learns our way." Hours passed. Sweat beaded on Rhys's brow as he ran drill after drill, using hand signals, short whistles, anything to build a shared language. At first she resisted, snarling and circling him like a predator testing its prey. But each time she obeyed a signal and struck a target, he gave a short nod, a calm, "Good." By afternoon, her responses were sharper, her movements timed to his commands. She began to anticipate him, crouching low when he raised his palm, springing forward at a sharp whistle. It was like teaching a child and a soldier all at once, frustrating, dangerous, and strangely fulfilling. Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Rhys cleaned the shallow cuts on her arms from the day's training. She sat on the floor, massive frame hunched, watching him with those unblinking eyes. When he dabbed disinfectant on a wound, she let out a low rumble but didn't pull away. "Kalen," he said suddenly, testing the name that had come to him earlier. "That's what I'll call you. Fits better than beast." She tilted her head at the sound, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw understanding flicker in her gaze. Night settled over the camp. Outside, the men gathered around fires, talking in low voices about the raid, about the thing that fought beside them. Inside his tent, Rhys sat at the edge of his cot, wiping down his sidearm, exhaustion pulling at him. He didn't hear her move, but when he looked up, Kalen was there, crouched at the foot of the cot, chains pulled around her wrists, eyes glinting in the lamplight. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. She didn't growl. She didn't move. She only watched him, a silent sentinel. For a moment, unease prickled at the back of his neck. Then he remembered the battlefield, the way she had thrown herself between him and a plasma bolt without hesitation. Whatever bond had formed, it was something beyond fear or command. He lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the night wind rattled loose panels, and somewhere a distant flare popped in the dark. Inside, Kalen remained still, her breath a steady rhythm in the silence. As sleep crept over him, Rhys thought of the soldiers' whispers that she was a monster. But monsters didn't stand guard over a man's bed. He closed his eyes, trusting her presence more than the perimeter walls. Chains broken, vows forged. The summons came at dawn, carried by a nervous lieutenant who avoided meeting Rhys's eyes. "Captain Calder," he stammered, "command requires your presence in the war room immediately." Rhys followed him through the corridors of the prefabricated base, Kalen padding silently behind despite the chains on her wrists. Soldiers in the hallways stepped aside, some watching her with awe, others with fear. Inside the war room, a holomap shimmered over the table. A senior officer, Colonel Dressen, leaned over the display. His eyes flicked to Kalen and narrowed. "She doesn't come in here," Dressen said sharply. "She stays with me." Rhys replied, voice calm but edged with steel. The colonel's lip curled, but he turned back to the map. "We've intercepted intel. The enemy stronghold at Larrick's Rift is vulnerable. We need a surgical strike team to breach, extract data, and destroy their comms hub. You've been volunteered. Rhys studied the terrain hologram, already plotting routes in his head. It will be close-quarters work, messy and fast. Understood, he said. Dressen gestured toward Kaelin. And that thing stays here, chained and under guard. She's a liability. Rhys straightened, feeling the weight of every scar on his body, every memory of how she had fought at his side. She's the reason we're alive after the last raid, he said evenly. If I'm going in Alaric's rift, she goes with me. Unchained. You'll answer for this if she turns on you. She won't, Rhys said simply. Hours later, under the shadow of a gunship, Rhys crouched before Kaelin. The wind of the engines whipped dust around them, rattling the remaining links of her restraints. He held the key in his hand, feeling its cold weight. Kaelin, he said, meeting her gaze. No more chains, but you follow me. Only me. She growled low in her throat. Not a threat, but something closer to a vow. Slowly, deliberately, Rhys unlocked the cuffs. The heavy restraints clattered to the ground. Kaelin flexed her arms, shaking off years of captivity. For the first time, she stood unbound, her full height shadowing him. The men nearby tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. Rhys didn't move. Neither did she. Instead, Kaelin lowered her head slightly, a gesture almost like a bow. Mount up, Rhys called, breaking the spell. The team boarded the gunship, Kaelin moving among them like a silent predator. The rift was a nightmare of jagged canyons and phosphorescent mist. The stronghold loomed ahead, carved into the rock, guarded by sentry drones. The strike team moved in under cover of darkness, Kaelin slinking at Rhys's side. At the first checkpoint, Rhys raised his fist. The team froze. 2 enemy patrols approached. Before Rhys could signal, Kaelin surged forward, a blur of claws and teeth. Her speed was terrifying, yet her strikes were controlled, precise. The patrols fell without a sound. They pressed deeper, weaving through narrow tunnels, past steaming conduits and flickering lights. When a blast door barred their path, Kaelin ripped the panel free with raw strength, exposing circuits Rhys quickly shorted. Deeper still, alarms began to blare. The enemy knew they were inside. Firefights erupted in the corridors. Rhys's team took cover, exchanging bursts of plasma fire. Kaelin moved through the chaos like a living weapon, cutting down foes before they could regroup. Left flank, Marin shouted. Rhys turned, saw a soldier about to be impaled by a spear of energy. He opened his mouth to warn. Kaelin was already there. She intercepted the strike with her armored forearm, snarling, then drove her claws through the attacker. The soldier stumbled back, staring at her in disbelief. Amid the battle, Kaelin's eyes found Rhys. She let out a single, guttural word, distorted but clear. Rhys. The sound froze him for half a heartbeat. She had spoken his name. Not a beast, not a weapon, a person. They reached the data core, ripped what they needed, and planted charges. As they raced for extraction, enemy forces closed in, pouring through every corridor. Rhys's rifle overheated, and he switched to his sidearm, but the tide was relentless. Kaelin roared, slamming into the attackers, carving a path with feral grace. She shielded him from a volley, her armor sparking under the impact. Together, they fought their way out, side by side, until the gunship's bay door yawned open and pulled them into safety. Back aboard, as the rift receded into the distance in a bloom of fire, Rhys sat heavily on a crate, catching his breath. Kaelin crouched nearby, blood, hers and theirs, dripping from her claws. She watched him, unblinking, as if awaiting orders. But there were none. For the first time, Rhys didn't see a beast in chains. He saw a warrior who had chosen her place at his side, the one who watches. The transport touched down at Delta 9 under a bruised sunset, its engines whining as they powered down. Soldiers gathered at the landing pad, eager for news of the raid. Rhys stepped off first, helmet tucked under one arm. Soot streaked across his face. Behind him, Kaelin emerged from the bay, taller than any of them, her claws still stained with dark blood. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She went with them. She came back alive. She fought for them. Colonel Dressen was waiting near the command tent, his face thunderous. "Captain Calder, my office." "Now." Rhys motioned for Kaelin to follow. She did, silent and watchful, her steps slow and deliberate. Inside, the holomap flickered with new orders and casualty reports. Dressen slammed his fist against the table. "You disobeyed a direct command. You unleashed an unregistered asset into a mission-critical operation. Do you even realize what could have happened?" Rhys set his helmet down with a heavy thud. "I realize we're standing here alive because of her. She is property of the faction that loaned her." She was Rhys cut in. His voice was calm, but every word carried steel. "But she chose to fight for us. You didn't see her in the rift. She's no beast. She's a soldier." Dressen's eyes flicked toward Kaelin, who stood unmoving, gaze locked on Rhys. For a long moment, the colonel said nothing. Then he exhaled through his nose and waved them out. "Get out of my sight before I change my mind." Night fell across the camp, lanterns flickering in the wind. The fires outside had been put out, but the scars of battle still marred the perimeter. Rhys sat on the steps of his quarters, rifle balanced across his knees, staring into the dark beyond the walls. The weight of Dressen's words still lingered, but deeper than that was the memory of Kaelin speaking his name. Behind him, the canvas rustled. He didn't need to turn to know she was there. She moved like shadow, her presence more felt than seen. "You don't have to stand there all night," he said quietly. "You're free now. You can go wherever you want." Silence. Then a low rumble, soft and steady, like distant thunder. She crouched near the cot again, chains gone, her armor glinting under the lamplight. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on him, steady and unyielding. Rhys set his rifle aside and leaned forward. "Is this what you want? To stay here? To guard me?" She tilted her head, as if considering, then tapped her chest lightly with one clawed finger, and then touched the ground beside his cot. A gesture, a claim. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a strange, grounding certainty. She wasn't staying because she was ordered. She was staying because she chose. Weeks passed. Word of the Rift raid spread far beyond Delta 9. Other units began asking for the human captain and his alien shadow. Some factions wanted her returned, citing contracts and chains. Rhys refused them all. On the eve of another deployment, he walked the perimeter, checking the defenses. Kaelin followed, as always, a silent sentinel in the shadows. Soldiers saluted them both now, and even the most hardened veterans spoke her name with respect. Back in his quarters, Rhys began to strip down his rifle for maintenance. Outside, the camp murmured with the low voices of tired men and women preparing for tomorrow's battle. Inside, Kaelin crouched as she always did, watching, waiting. He looked up at her. "You know, most people would think it's unnerving the way you sit there every night. But I've been through enough to know better." He smiled faintly, tired but genuine. "You're not a beast anymore, Kaelin. You're family." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she made a sound that wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a low, almost melodic tone, rising and falling, a language he couldn't understand, but whose meaning he felt all the same. Rhys set the rifle aside and lay back on the cot. Outside, distant artillery thudded like a heartbeat. Inside, Kaelin remained where she was, head slightly bowed, breath steady. They had given him a beast in chains. Now she watched over him, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, but as the one who chose to guard his bed at night.